This is the audiobook sample for The Brain Gang by Greg Hansen. This is my 35th audiobook, and it was released on February 18th, 2021. If you're in the market for offbeat science fiction, I'd check this one out. You get to hear me talk in a robot voice for a large chunk of it, which I think suits my higher-pitched voice very well. Now, that being said, I'm not sure what the endgame of this book is. Like my other videos about books I've done that I've been perplexed about, I'm going to focus on one thing. I think my biggest issue with it is how it handles domestic abuse. Here come spoilers for the story. If you want to skip this part and go right to the sample, there's a timestamp in the description. So the story follows a few generations of mothers and daughters, all of whom treated each other terribly in different ways, usually directly from mother to daughter. And the story goes out of its way to highlight what exactly it was the mothers did from the daughters' perspectives. The mothers would insult the daughters, belittle them, and all in all just make their lives miserable. Then, after the vague promise of absolute knowledge and power, all of which happens out of earshot of the reader, the women immediately forget about their lifelong abuse and pledge to work together to assume new identities and live their best lives by swapping their brains into people's bodies. They don't seem to have any malicious intent, because they use bodies where the brains are otherwise incapacitated, but there is an exception. They do plant a girl's brain in a guy's body against his will, but then they give him another body later on, which I guess makes it okay. He doesn't seem to mind after a while. It's difficult to explain how the story has difficulty wrapping up storylines in service of a theme, but if you ever listen or read the whole thing, you'll understand what I mean. I think I would grasp the intent of the story better if the women went their separate ways after achieving their new lives. Like after a lifetime of being abused, they could live their new lives away from their abusers. That would at least have some consistency with the characters that the book presents to us, and hint at deeper machinations and possibly intriguing scheming between them. But they all just sort of get along by the end, and they even stay in contact in a sort of pseudo-sisterhood of the traveling pants type friendship. And the book even ends with them all working together. This, to me, reeks of the abuse that they suffered being swept under the rug for plot convenience. Let me tell you right now, you don't want to use domestic and emotional abuse, especially between women, as a plot contrivance to advance your story along, especially when you're a male author. It's not a good look. I hope you enjoy this audiobook sample. Chapter 1. 6'2", muscular Dr. Frank Siemens peered into a glass tank containing a shimmering green liquid, checking his reflection and congratulating himself on his good looks. He was quite proud of his tan face, dark blue eyes, and dimpled chin, and prouder still of his hard body. His partner, 5'8", slightly built Dr. Richard Wilson, also studied his reflection, extremely satisfied with his intellectual brilliance. Pretending to be interested in the object in front of him, he instead stole glances of Siemens, shuddering at the thought of his lover's masculinity. He wished he could be as virile as Siemens, but, he reminded himself, he was the intellectual force behind their project. Siemens and Wilson continued to stare into the tank, Siemens moving wisps of hair from his face, and Wilson fighting the longing he had for Siemens building in his body. After a few minutes, though, both returned their minds to the work at hand. Siemens and Wilson scrutinized a brain floating in the liquid, and the two eyes connected to it by a tangle of muscles intertwined with nerves. To keep the eyes from floating around aimlessly, they had contained them within small glass boxes attached to the inside of the tank. Shiny, needle-thin steel probes emanated from various parts of the brain, probes that were attached to electronic equipment that was, in turn, attached to wires that led to a computer system. Bright, shimmering, red fluid pulsed through clear plastic conduits connected to the carotid arteries leading to the brain, the red and green colors combining to create a grayish halo around the tubes. "Everything looks good," Wilson said. "Those disembodied eyes are kind of freaking me out," Siemens said. "Yeah," Wilson said. "But some of what we see is almost Christmassy, isn't it?" "What are you talking about?" Siemens asked. "The red and green color combination," Wilson said, smiling. Siemens sighed and rolled his eyes. "Yeah, except for the gray brain taking up most of the space." Pouting a bit, Wilson put his hands on his hips and mumbled, "You have no sense of the artistic." Then, after sighing, he continued, "All right, let's check things one more time." Wilson and Siemens checked and rechecked the electrodes, examined readouts on the computer screen, and paced back and forth in front of the tank, the armpits of their lab coats slowly becoming drenched with sweat. "Well, Richard, shall we wake her up now?" Dr. Siemens asked. "No reason to wait, Frank," Dr. Wilson replied. "I'll control the electronics. Cross your fingers." Dr. Wilson sat at the computer and tapped in some commands. While he examined the readouts on the LCD screen, Dr. Siemens bent from the waist and stared into the tank. Bubbles rose up from the bottom of the tank, and ribbons of light flashed outward from the electrodes. After a minute or so, the bubbles dissipated and the lights diminished. Suddenly, a robotic, feminine voice crackled from a speaker next to the tank. "Where am I?" Wilson and Siemens covered their mouths, jumped in the air, and gave each other high fives. "Who are you?" the voice asked. "Who the fuck are you, and what have you done to me?" Now, Mrs. Wall," Wilson said. "This is going to take some explaining. You're in a lab, or more precisely, your brain, your mind is in a lab. You see, Mrs. Wall, the physical you died about a month ago, but we have been able to preserve the mental you." "What? What are you talking about?" the voice asked. Dr. Siemens walked in front of the tank, his back straight and his chest out, exhibiting a great deal of pride. "We, Dr. Wilson and I, Dr. Siemens, we have preserved your brain and all of your senses. You were 102, Mrs. Wall. Your body failed, but your mind will live forever." A link to purchase The Brain Gang is in the description. This title was a pay-for-hour production, so I do not make money from any purchases. Thanks for listening.